Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Michael Wilson, and I'm the webinar producer for KardasLarson. Today's session is Employee Compensation, Strategic or Flying by the Seat of Your Pants. We'll spend the next 30 minutes exploring tips for navigating the world of compensation and how to prepare for it using well-thought-out procedures. Now for a few housekeeping notes. Everyone on the line is muted by default. You can download the presentation and respond to polls when prompted. The presentation's in that handouts section of your GoToWebinar interface. You can also use the question box to ask or answer questions of our presenters. Please follow KardasLarson on LinkedIn and Twitter, and check out our new website to see more information about our webinars. And we value your feedback, so please take the survey that you receive after the webinar. That email will contain a recording of this session. Now let's meet your presenters. Lisa Scapani and Lois Krause have spent many years helping organizations of all types and sizes to successfully develop and grow both their people and their businesses. Lois has a special expertise in labor law management, while Lisa's proficiency is in leveraging employee performance and development. Both of your presenters are committed to helping you maximize performance. Now I'll turn it over to Lois to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Wow, what a whirlwind this week has been with all the new FLSA regulations being released. I have had a lot of clients contact me with a lot of questions and for help in implementing these changes. Lisa, have you had any inquiries about that?
Absolutely. I've had a lot of people reaching out to me, and what's interesting, Lois, it's not really about the regulations that they've been talking about. It's been about how they now talk to their employees about this. They've got employees coming to them saying, you know, when is my raise going to be effective? So I think it's very timely that we have this particular webinar today. So let's get into it.
Okay. As we stated in our blog earlier this month, organizations of all sizes struggle with employee compensation, and smaller organizations, especially under 100, have an even tougher time trying to develop a true compensation strategy. Most of the time, they fly by the seat of their pants and just do whatever it takes to hire and retain good talent. They make multiple mistakes, which could put them in danger of legal liability should a disgruntled employee complain to the Department of Labor about their pay. Often without a planned, structured compensation strategy and implementation plan, you leave yourselves open to an indefensible position, which will cost you legal fees and penalties in addition to back pay. So, why a strategic approach is this is what we're going to cover today. Why a strategic approach is necessary, myths many businesses believe, the new FLSA regulations and how to implement them, recognizing and preventing pitfalls, and a step-by-step guide to implementing a strategic compensation plan. First, let's take a poll. Tell us how does your organization currently handle compensation? And if you don't fall into one of the specific choices listed, please select one that most closely describes your organization. We'll give you a few minutes here. Okay, so it looks like about 14% of you are very unstructured. You don't have any job grades or ranges or do market analysis. And 43% of you have some structure with job grades, but you seldom update them. And the other 43 are highly structured with job grades and ranges, and they're updated frequently. That's really very good. You're going in the right direction. Okay. We know that balancing fair compensation with your greatest expense, payroll, is what keeps business owners and heads of HR up at night. But now, with the added dimension of the increase in the minimum salary level for exemptions from overtime that were released last week, it is really going to create sleepless nights. The key to an effective compensation program is to have a strategy, be transparent, and benchmark your industry and geography on a regular basis. Gone are the days of going with the flow and paying your people what you think the market demands.
So there are some myths out there in terms of compensation, and our founding partner, Carol Kardas, has pulled together these myths after many years of research and working in the compensation world. So the first myth, paying all employees relatively the same salary will make everyone happy. And actually it won't. The reason for that is that it will cause people to become disengaged, and it doesn't differentiate performance, and your high performers will be turned off by that. Myth number 2, employees work to the highest level of productivity if they are being paid fairly, if they perceive they're being paid fairly. And the perception of being paid fairly is important. In fact, if you ask someone, are you paid enough? They will probably say no. None of us are ever paid enough. But if you ask them, are you paid fairly, then that might be a yes. But to pay people fairly, you have to recognize high performers. And what will happen is if you don't recognize high performers, then they will reduce their performance because they feel like, why should I work harder or differently when I make the same amount of money as everyone else? Myth number 3, you don't need to give employees a salary increase when you promote them. Well, just try that once and see how that works. Many employees are motivated by moving up and gaining additional responsibility in an organization. And if you don't recognize that, they will truly become disengaged and most likely leave your organizations. Myth number 4, if employees receive a 3% salary increase across the board once a year, that is sufficient to keep them happy. That's often referred to as COLA, cost of living adjustment, where you give the same increase across the board. Again, you are not differentiating performance here, and we really truly live in a world today where people want to be recognized for their performance through their pay. We actually have a client who's just moved from a cost of living adjustment to a pay for performance model. And their challenge is really helping employees understand why they have moved to that particular model and what the benefits are. So it's really been interesting to watch them and hear from them in terms of that journey. And finally, myth number 5, promotions are the only way to reward employees for hard work. And that absolutely is not true. You can reward employees based on their performance through recognition programs, allowing them to go to some sort of advanced training, on-the-spot rewards. So there are a number of different ways to recognize the effort that an employee puts forth without actually promoting them. And interestingly, I have a client right now that they're looking at, before they promote someone, that person really needs to have demonstrated that they can do that job and they've met the requisite learning requirements and certifications before they will promote them. And then when they promote them, obviously there'll be an increase that goes along with it. but they have determined that their strategy will be, once you're fully ready to move on to the next role, that's when we will promote you. So we need to keep in mind these myths. Some of you may have these myths in your organization, and your leaders may believe some of these things, particularly the 14% of you that has an unstructured compensation program. So now let's move on to those new FLSA regulations that we were talking about at the start of the call.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. With the new FLSA regulations that were released last week, there is a new urgency to evaluate your compensation in regard to the new salary test. The new minimum salary for the exempt status from overtime has actually doubled from the current minimum weekly salary for the exemption. Even if the duties of the position pass the current regulations for the exemption, you really must decide whether you want to raise the weekly salary to the new level of $913 per week, which is $47,476 yearly, or reclassify the employee as a non-exempt worker and have the employee track their time and pay them overtime, which is 1.5 times their hourly wage, for any hours worked over 40 hours in a work week. Plus, ensure they have scheduled breaks and lunch like the rest of the non-exempt group. And then also, speaking of the duties of the exemption, when you're auditing your positions to evaluate whether how you're going to handle the pay issues, please double check your duties as well. This is a perfect time to ensure all positions are classified properly from that perspective as well. At times, the position began as an exempt position, but over time, or new and changing managers manage the position differently, and what is really listed on the description has changed and may now qualify as non-exempt. And the second choice about switching them over to the non-exempt will come with a very carefully communication strategy. So address possible morale issues that may arise. Many employees that are classified as exempt feel they are being demoted if they're changed to a non-exempt status. Some exempts believe that with the new regulations, they must have an automatic increase, as Lisa mentioned earlier. They do not realize that they could be reclassified as non-exempt instead. This could be a whole separate webinar on its own, but if you follow our suggestions to create a strategic compensation plan and do the work, it will make it much easier for you to be in compliance with the new regulations.
So I'm curious about how you share your compensation philosophy in your organization. So take a couple of minutes and let us know if you don't share your philosophy and you keep everything confidential, if you only share your ranges and don't solicit feedback, or if you share your philosophy, ranges, and you ask your employees for feedback. Okay. Looks like half of you keep everything confidential, and then a quarter of you share the ranges, or half of the other half, and half of the other half also shares the philosophy, ranges, and asks for feedback. So as we move on and talk about having a strategy, one of the things that you're going to hear us talk about is transparency. But let's move on to talking about the strategic approach.
Okay. Well, with all of that in mind, we believe you should create a strategic plan for compensation instead of flying by the seat of your pants. Just as you develop a strategic plan to run your business, you need to develop a compensation plan to compensate people appropriately. Okay, let's discuss some recommendations for this process. First, start with your job descriptions. You will need to develop comprehensive position descriptions for all positions. Do an audit of all position descriptions and evaluate them in regard to what is actually being done in that position, and ensure the description accurately reflects that. Often we find that many organizations use descriptions that are old and outdated and have not caught up with technology or were written for people that left over 5 years ago or more. Always write the description for the job, not for the person. You may have a job that only covers one specific person, but you should write it from the perspective that will be correct for anyone you may hire to come into your organization now or in the future in that role. Make sure you list the educational and experience requirements as required and or preferred. Make sure you list what is actually required to do in the job. It will help with your market analysis.
The next thing that you want to consider is a point of view. And what I mean by a point of view is you really need to determine what your philosophy is going to be. Thinking about, are you going to pay at market, or are you going to pay above market, or even below market? So that is a critical thing to consider. The other piece to look at is what is going to be the complement of your compensation mix. Are you going to have a pay for performance element, and are you going to put a portion or a percentage of an employee's compensation at risk and tied to performance? So you really need to think about those things as you're putting your strategy together. And then you have to look at your overall benefits. What is the overall total reward program for your organization? And I think as employers are looking to the future, we really need to consider, and I know we talk a lot about millennials, we really need to consider what are the drivers of the next generation that's coming into the workforce. I think on one of our last webinars we may have shared a statistic that that millennials are willing to sacrifice compensation to have a better quality of life. So as employers, you need to look at your total rewards and consider what things you might do to better key into the motivating factors of the employees and the different generations within your organization. And then the other piece is really researching the market. How are you going to go about doing that? What sources are you going to use to determine what is the market pay in this particular geographic area or the geographic area where you are operating? And it's really important to consider that particular geographic area and not necessarily look at, for example, national average if you're in the Northeast, because it tends to be a little bit more expensive. So you need to know what your data sources are and how you're going to research that information. And then really, once you have created a point of view, you want to move on to being transparent. And as we saw through the poll, about half of you are transparent with your philosophy and your ranges to some degree. And then half of you keep the information confidential. And we really recommend to our clients that you do become transparent. Share your philosophy with all your employees. If you pay below market, but you have put more at risk in terms of bonus or pay for performance, share that with your organization and be transparent. Your people will appreciate that. Be transparent with your job grades, your ranges, as well as your market data. You know, people can go online and get information from Glassdoor, from various information centers, and they need to understand that that tends to be national average information or information just from a particular geographic area. And if you can share with them what the market data looks like in your particular area, they will better understand why your pay ranges are set the way that they are. And ask for feedback. Ask for feedback in terms of what's important to your employees. As I mentioned, what's important to millennials, as we all know, may not be as important to baby boomers. And so really understanding what's important to your employee base so that you can tailor your compensation and benefit practices to that organization. And based on their feedback, if there are changes that can be implemented, please implement those changes. There's nothing worse than asking for feedback and really not doing anything with it. So we really encourage you to be transparent. And you can be as transparent as Whole Foods, where everybody's salary is transparent to the entire organization, or you can be as transparent as just reviewing your philosophy, talking about how you determined your job grades and your ranges and what market data you used. But we really have found tremendous success with organizations who do come to some level of transparency. It truly helps to engage your employees.
The next step is seeking help. I know people in smaller organizations are saying, I don't have time for this. I can barely keep up with my strategic plan for running the business. To run your business, you will need good, high-performing employees. So this should be one of your top priorities. If you're having trouble trying to implement this type of strategic plan, seek outside help, if need be. As we discussed before, most smaller organizations do not have a compensation department to keep on top of the latest and greatest in the world of work. As a matter of fact, they usually put that on the current payroll person to keep up with, who may or may not already be saddled with the rest of the human resource function. Reach out for help to get this researched and evaluated. To just let it go would be a big mistake. So don't let your organization turn into a circus. Plan ahead and ask yourself the following questions. How do I determine what my compensation and benefit strategy will be? How do I determine what the market pays? What types of reviews do I do? How do I pay for performance to ensure good employee engagement and productivity? How do I address all of these issues and stay current while running my business? Start with the job descriptions. Develop your strategic plan. Be transparent. Seek help. This is a juggling act, so you need to create a very comprehensive plan to address all of the items mentioned above. You may need to get some outside help to get it right, and KardasLarson is here to help you if you need it. Now, Michael, can you let us know if our listeners had any questions?
Sure. Thanks, Lois. The first question we have here says, can I include all insurance licensed CSRs and salespeople inside and out as a professional and classify them as exempt?
I'll take that one. Actually, CSRs are actually listed in the FLSA regs as non-exempt unless they, like you said, they had to be certified in a certain position. Well, usually CSRs are not classified as exempt, and inside sales is not classified as exempt. So the insurance licensed people, it would have to be they would have to have a significant amount of field of study to be classified as professional. They would have to have the educational background and the certification classes as well to be able to be classified as exempt under the professional. So
okay.
I'd have to take a look at that one.
Okay, thanks, Lois. Lisa, I think this is one that falls into your area. When you talk about communication, do you tell everyone or just the employees that need to have changes made?
Lisa, did you hear that one?
Sorry about that. I would advocate that you communicate to your entire organization that this is occurring, that the FLSA rules have changed, and that you will be talking individually with affected associates. Because it's been so highly publicized in the media, most people are aware of these regulations changing. But again, I go back to being transparent and letting your organization know basically that you're on it and that you're going to talk to individuals' employees based on their particular compensation status.
Were there any other questions, Michael?
Lisa, just to follow up on that, do many companies actually tell all of the employees what the pay strategy is?
Actually, I would say based on my experience, the results that we saw in the poll of it sort of being 50-50, that is basically what I've seen out there. But I do find that the organizations that do take the time to communicate the philosophy and the strategy to all of their employees, they have more engaged employees. And that's documented through their engagement surveys as well. So being transparent truly helps to glue your employees to the organization. And I always say to people that if you can go to bed at night and be able to justify why you have paid someone differently than someone else and be able to communicate that when asked the question, either they have more experience, more certifications, they have their job content is a little bit different in terms of responsibility. You have done your job in terms of creating a fair compensation program if you can effectively communicate that.
And Lisa, when you talk about communication, do you think it's best to communicate differently to the different types of employees in the organization, or is it one message for all?
I think the strategy, your overall compensation strategy, depending upon if it's the same message for everyone, then you could communicate that same message. I have a client where the bonus program was different for their distribution center than it was for their support center. So both groups of people knew what the program and the philosophy was for each other and why it was different. And so that helped from a perspective of people always wondering, why is this person over in IT have a different bonus than I do over in the distribution center? And what was important to the distribution center team was different. And the organization, in fact, had the same program for everyone. And they took the time to listen to the feedback from the distribution center and make changes to their program.
Thank you, Lisa. And Lois, I have a couple of follow-up questions for you as well about your section. And the first being, do you think that the minimum salary level or payment over time will have a big effect on benefits?
Oh, absolutely. Over time, people are going to have to look at, well, every year everybody looks at compensation as a whole package. And over time, the benefits are rising as well. And if the minimums have risen, and if you wind up having to pay either the overtime or the minimum as the exempt, it raises, it's really going to harm, people's planned budgets, especially starting this year. But they're going to have to balance the whole thing, and benefits will have to change. They're going to have to get very creative to figure out how to handle the benefits with their rising costs as well, and maybe find some ancillary benefits, or get very creative with different types of flexibility and benefits to be able to recruit and retain high performers.
And Lois, a follow-up to that, can you use bonus money to get the exempt salary up to the minimum $47,000 number, or does it have to be all base salary?
You can actually use bonus money. You can use 10% can be paid in bonus if it is paid out at least quarterly, and it is non-discretionary. It has to be based on some type of metric, and it has to be guaranteed. It can't be just because we did well this year, we're going to give this discretionary out. It has to be something that's actually planned in the budget and guaranteed, and has to be paid at least once a quarter. And it can only be up to 10% of that. So it can only be up to the like $4,748.
All right, thank you, Lois. And thank all of you for attending this KardasLarson webinar. We encourage you to follow KardasLarson on LinkedIn and Twitter to receive information on future webinars, compliance updates, and our speaking engagements. Please be on the lookout later for an email with a survey and a recording of this presentation. You can still download the presentation if you haven't had the chance to from the Hangout section within GoToWebinar. We are now signing off. Thank you.